right, so today we are going to start talking about the nervous system. The endocrine system and the nervous system work in very close, they have a very close partnership, if you want to say that. And together they maintain our internal coordination. Okay, the endocrine system coordinates by means of chemical messengers, which we call hormones, that are secreted into the blood. And the nervous system employs electrical and chemical means to send messages from cell to cell. The nervous system carries out its task in 3 basic steps. First, we have a sense organ that will receive information about changes in the body and maybe about the external environment. And this then transmits a coded message to the spinal cord and to the brain. The brain and the spinal cord then process this information and relate it to past experiences. By doing this, they are then able to determine what response is appropriate to the current circumstances. The brain and spinal cord issue commands then to our muscles and to our glands that will carry out the appropriate response. There are 2 major anatomical subdivisions of the nervous system. There is the central nervous system. This is the brain and the spinal cord that are enclosed in bony coverings, and this is enclosed in the cranium and the vertebral column. And there is the peripheral nervous system. And these are all of the nervous system items except the brain and the spinal cord. It is composed of the nerves and the ganglia. A nerve is a bundle of nerve fibers, or axons, that are wrapped in fibrous connective tissue. A ganglion is a knot-like swelling in a nerve where the neuron cell bodies are concentrated. We have sensory divisions of the peripheral nervous system. We have what are called the sensory afferent division, and these carry sensory signals from various receptors to the central nervous system. The sensory division informs the CNS of stimuli within or around the body. The somatic sensory division carries signals from receptors in the skin, muscles, bones, and joints. There is also what's called the visceral sensory division, and this carries signals from the viscera of the thoracic and the abdominal cavities, which is the heart, lungs, stomach, and urinary bladder. You also have what's called a motor division of the peripheral nervous system. The motor or efferent division carries signals from the central nervous system to gland and muscle cells that carry out the body's responses. Effectors are cells and organs that respond to commands from the central nervous system. We have a somatic motor division, which carries signals to skeletal muscles, and you have a visceral motor division, which is also called the autonomic nervous system, and this carries signals to glands, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. This can be broken down then into a sympathetic and a parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division tends to arouse the body for action, meaning it might accelerate the heart rate and respiration while inhibiting the digestive or urinary systems. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic division, and this tends to have a calming effect, which will slow the heart rate and breathing and stimulate the digestive and the urinary systems. So they work in opposition. Here is a very nice picture of how this breaks down. I would print this out and keep it near and dear because it really shows you everything that I just said in words in a nice little mind map. Your two divisions are on top there, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and then it shows how each of those break down. There are some universal properties of neurons. These are the cells of the nervous system. They are excitable. They respond to environmental changes that we call stimuli. They can conduct, meaning neurons respond to stimuli by producing electrical signals that are quickly conducted to other cells at distant locations. They also deal in secretion. When electrical signals reach the end of a nerve fiber, a chemical neurotransmitter is secreted that crosses the gap and stimulates the next cell. There are also some different functional types of neurons: sensory, interneurons, and motor. The sensory or afferent neurons are specialized to detect stimuli. They then transmit this information to the central nervous system. They begin in almost every organ in the body and end in the CNS. So the afferent neurons are conducting signals towards the CNS. Then there are what are called interneurons or association neurons, and these are found only in the CNS. They receive signals from many neurons and carry out the integrative function, meaning they process, store, and retrieve information and make decisions that determine how the body will respond to a stimuli. Almost 90% of all neurons are interneurons. They lie between and interconnect the incoming sensory pathways and the outgoing motor pathways of the central nervous system. And then we have what are called motor or efferent neurons, and these send signals to the muscles and the gland cells. Motor because most of them lead to muscles. That's why they're called that. Efferent neurons conduct signals away from the central nervous system. So you can think of this as a loop. Basically, the sensory neurons are picking up stimuli from the outside world, from your muscles, your organs, your cells, from whatever you're touching maybe, and it's taking that information into the interneurons where they are making decisions, and then they are sending that signal back out through the motor neuron, which is going to cause you to do something. So let's say that you touch something hot with the tip of your finger. Your sensory neuron is sending information basically to your brain saying, that is hot, we need to move, and the message is then relayed to your muscle, which would cause your finger to lift off of the hot item. So there's a pathway there, right? There's a group of things that happen in a certain specific order that deal with how our neurons are speaking and how these electrical impulses are conducted. Here is a little picture of that, which is kind of what I just said. Again, if the finger is the sensory, boom, something is, hot, you take that message to the brain says, uh-oh, it remembers that once before we did this and we got hurt. So it says, we better pull away. Tell that muscle to get that finger off that stove. Right? So here is the loop. Neurons neurons are kind of complicated. This is a really nice picture here that kind of shows a bunch of stuff that is happening within that one cell. So we have what's called the soma, and this is the central control center of the neuron. It is also called the neurosoma, cell body, or the perikaryon. It has a single centrally located nucleus with a large nucleolus. The cytoplasm contains mitochondria, lysosomes, and a Golgi complex, numerous inclusions, an extensive, rough endoplasmic reticulum, and a cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton consists of a dense mesh of microtubules and neurofibrils. And this helps compartmentalize what's going on inside. There are no centrioles because these cells cannot further divide. The inclusions may contain glycogen granules, lipid droplets, melanin, and lipofuscin. We also have dendrites. There is a vast number of branches that come out with these thick branches from the soma, and these are what we call dendrites. They kind of resemble the bare branches of a tree in winter. They are the primary site for receiving signals from other neurons. The more dendrites the neuron has, the more information it can receive and incorporate into decision making. It provides a precise pathway from the reception and processing of all neuroinformation. There is also an axon, or what we call a nerve fiber. And this originates from a mound on one side of the soma called the axon hillock. It is cylindrical and relatively unbranched for most of its length. It does branch extensively at the distal end. It is specialized for rapid conduction of nerve signals to points remote on the soma. There is what's called the axoplasm, which is the cytoplasm of the axon. There is an axolemma, which is the plasma membrane of the axon. And you only have one axon per neuron. Schwann cells and myelin sheath enclose the axon. And this has to do with how quickly things get transmitted, and we will talk about that later. The distal end is of the axon has a terminal arborization, which is an extensive, complex bunch of fine branches. There is a synaptic knob, and this is a little swelling that forms a junction with the next cell. It contains synaptic vesicles that are full of neurotransmitters. This has to do with the chemical exchange that happens between a nerve and a muscle. There are different types of neuron structures. You can have a multipolar neuron, a bipolar neuron, a unipolar neuron, and an aniaxic neuron. The names kind of give you a hint as to what's going on. So a multipolar neuron has one axon and multiple dendrites. They are the most common, and they are what compose most of the neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. There are bipolar neurons. These have one axon and one dendrite. We see these in the olfactory cells, the retina, and our inner ear. There are unipolar neurons. They have a single process leading away from the soma. We find these in the sensory cells of our skin and organs to our spinal cord. And an aniaxic neuron has many dendrites but no axon. And we see these that deal with vision. Axonal transport. Many proteins made in the soma must be transported to the axon and the axon terminal. This might be to repair the axolemma or serve as a gated ion channel protein, such as enzymes or neurotransmitters. So with this axonal transport, you find a two-way passage of proteins, organelles, and other material that move along an axon. An antegrade transport is movement down the axon away from the soma, and a retrograde transport is movement up the axon toward the soma. Microtubules guide the materials along the axon. Motor proteins somewhat carry materials on their back while they crawl along these microtubules. Kinesin is a motor protein in the antegrade transport, and dynein is the motor protein in retrograde transport. These movements can be fast or slow. A fast axonal transport occurs at the rate of 20 to 400 millimeters per day. Fast antegrade transport can be up to 400 millimeters a day, and we see this with organelles, enzymes, synaptic vesicles, and small molecules. In fast retrograde transport, we see it being used for recycled materials and pathogens, things that may be like rabies or herpes simplex, tetanus, or polioviruses. And this is why there is sometimes a delay between the infection and the symptoms, and this is because time is needed to transport these items up the axon. And then we have slow axonal transport, or axoplasmic flow. And this is 0.5 to 10 millimeters per day. This is always antegrade. It moves enzymes, cytoskeletal components, and new axoplasm down the axon during repair and regeneration of damaged axons. Damaged nerve fibers regenerate at a speed governed by slow axonal transport. And that brings us to the end of our first lecture. I know we have covered a lot of material in a short amount of time, so please let me know if you have any questions.